Welcome back to the HallOfSportz Podcast. This is another episode of the Rugby Room. I'm joined today by Grav from the RucknRoll Podcast to kind of talk about the absolute chaos from the weekend and what we call the Six Nations Championship. It was, when they called it Super Saturday, it really lived up to that name on Saturday this past week.
Yeah, it's probably the best one for quite a while, I think. We've had a few superb Saturdays. The final game to end it especially, and I know that the second game would have been quite exciting for you as an Irishman. It was a great day to watch, but yeah, I don't think we could have asked for much more from it.
No, absolutely. Look, we'll be getting through pretty much everything that kind of happened, and look, I guess where we have to start is when we talk about kind of the Wales and France game, because it was one of those that you couldn't really take your eyes off it. I think it was the first 15 minutes and there was 28 points on the board. And it was really high intensity in that kind of first 20 to 25 minutes. Watching that as obviously a Welsh fan yourself, is what was going through your head? Did you think that this is what we need to do? Or were you hoping that the game would calm down a little bit because of kind of how fast flowing the French usually are?
I think I tweeted about 20 minutes in. I was going to text the Guinness World Records because I think going that long without breathing, I don't think anyone else has done that before. It was an incredible start. And the Pivac is the way we've looked to play. In the autumn, we were awful. We chopped and changed, but it's been clear that that's what we want to do. We want to do the same as he did at the Scarlets. We want to play fast and open, and we want to play a nice offloading game and bring players. So it was always going to be sort of our strength, but it's France's strength as well. So it's always going to be who does it better on the day. It showed that first half how well it never really let up. To be fair, we had a little bit of a sag in the middle maybe, but it wasn't awful like we've seen in some games. I say especially after watching the Autumn Nations Cup, the COVID Cup as I keep calling it. It was such bad rugby. It was so awful. And Wales and Ireland especially were perhaps two of the worst teams there. To have this on the back of it is like discovering a new sport. It's been unbelievable.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting tournament from Wales. That's like a neutral from seeing that first game between Ireland and Wales. I wasn't too convinced on the Welsh team going into the tournament, and even after that first game, because you had to wonder how much was it that Ireland being down to 14 men so early on in the game.
Yeah.
But then I think where a lot of people started to believe in Wales a little bit was that English game, where they really went toe-to-toe with England and they deserved to win in the end. Before we kind of go through this French game, as an overall tournament, how much do you think that this Welsh team have improved over the past kind of 12 months?
Well, it's the one thing that I've been saying. I've been adamant that at some point it was going to click. And I just said, you've got to wait. It's got to happen. I think bringing Gethin Jenkins in as defence coach has been a massive help as well, because we needed that bit of grit as well. We had nice guys as coaches. Like Pivac is famously quite a nice guy. Stephen Jones is a lovely guy. So we had all, and so I think he's just a little bit of aggression, a little bit of a grumpy figure in there. It's helped no end, but it's also given that time to click, and we've had players back. We changed so much in the autumn. And people say, well, we haven't lost many players from our 15, but what we essentially lost was all our pivotal players. We lost Adley Parks. We didn't have Thomas Francis in there. Ken Owens was gone. So we lost important cogs in the machine, and it fell apart. So I think it was always going to happen at some point. Or I felt it was always going to happen at some point. I don't think other people were quite as optimistic. But the improvement in such a short period of time is perhaps the biggest improvement since Gatland came in on the back of the 2007 World Cup, where we crashed out in the pools, and rightly so. We were even poor against Canada in that tournament, to then in the March looking like world beaters and beating England the first game. We've done the same thing again. It seems to be whenever we're down, we come back strong. So it's continuing that and keeping this growth going. We've got another 2 years to go to our end goal essentially. So as long as we can keep this improvement going, it's an exciting time as a Welsh fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a couple of different people on the podcast throughout the Six Nations, and anytime it comes up with Wales, not a lot of people were convinced, but the one thing I've always kind of said is that the team know how to win Test rugby, and It is a really important element because you see that with a lot of younger teams where they just don't have those experienced leaders where they just know how to win Test rugby games. Because we've seen the difference between kind of when you have these club teams to when they actually have to go and play international rugby.
Yeah.
How important do you think it is to have some of those players? Like, I know early on in the tournament, these were missing quite a lot of kind of your established players. Getting players like Falatau and things back was always going to help, but how important was that towards the end of the tournament to get some of those experienced players back that kind of helped some of the younger players along the way?
Yeah, I think it's massive, and it's like you look at, even with the likes of George North being in a centre, it's a new position to him, but you've got him and Foxy in there, him and Jonathan Davis, and suddenly you've got Australia and then Bigger at 10. So that nucleus of the back line's already there. I mean, Alan Wynne, you can't put a price on how important he is to have. And, you know, you watch him in the 79th minute, he was absolutely out on his feet and still making tackles and still tracking back. And we've seen it in the Ireland game with him and Tipperick racing back in the 80th minute to make a tackle. It's unbelievable, the effort that they put in, and it drags everyone up. And I think you look at Italy at the moment and the way they keep sort of not even fading but collapsing. And my argument's been that they've got no senior player there at the moment. They just sort of grab them by the scruff of the neck and give them a shake and G them up a little bit. And so when the pressure really comes on, they're collapsing. And I think what we're seeing is the opposite. Maybe we did collapse a little bit in our last 20 minutes, but I think a lot of that was just the pressure that France put on. But I think in games where we would have struggled otherwise, like Scotland, like Ireland, though they've lifted us up, and it brings everyone with you. And then when you've got that youth mixed with the experience, that's when we look really good.
Yeah, look, I guess we'll talk about that kind of last 10 to 15 minutes, or as you said, kind of 20 minutes there.
Do we have to?
Yeah, I know.
We have to talk about it.
It's a tough one, but look, I was talking to kind of my family during the game as we were watching, kind of what was the kind of way it was going to go, because you saw France score that try, comes back, and it turned out to be a red card, which, to be fair, it probably is a red card based on kind of what happened. We need to try and get neck rolls out of the game, and then when you do catch somebody in the eye as well, you're going to get sent off for it. I understood up to that point of what some of the Welsh tactics were to try and slow the game down, but the one problem that I had in terms of maybe some of their experienced players was the idea that they kept giving away penalties. And the problem is, and we saw it even with the Liam Williams yellow card, that when you look back at it, it might not be a blatant yellow card, but you give that referee that decision to make. And with the amount of infringements that were going on in the last 20 minutes, you're kind of it's like, you know, when a referee is looking at one team that's dominating the scrums, that they're going to be the ones that are tend to get the advantage there. When you see the Welsh infringing so much over the last 20 minutes, for me, I thought it was very bad of kind of the leaders of that team, because you've just seen the French team go off to 14 men. The last thing you can do is get a yellow card and actually get two. I think that was probably the biggest mistake from a Welsh point of view in the last 20 minutes. Whether it was Alwyn Jones or somebody else should have got them together and basically said to them, look, the next infringement, it's going to be a yellow card, so we need to try and limit it and not give the referee a decision to make.
Yeah, I think it's talked about so much of sort of painting the picture for the ref, especially so we talk about, you know, we're painting the picture and we didn't paint a good picture of ourselves. But I think the problem is that when France click and play that well and they've got that quick ball, it's very difficult to stop it. And I think like the Falatau, when he sort of hangs on a little bit too long, so when he gets up, he's bumping Saranin. And so it's not a usual Falatau mistake either, but I think it's just France were playing with so much intensity and so much pace. And in a way, they haven't played for the last 20 minutes in any game up until that one. We just couldn't keep up. Like once that ball starts rolling, it's how you get it stopped. And then a little bit of, perhaps we weren't quite clever enough. I think when you see with the last penalty that we give away that leads to the try, where he just accepts the contact and goes down, and so Correa loses his footing. It's very clever play, and then it's given his ceiling off, and it's clear he's just lost his foot, but it's going to be given every time. Like if you fall on top of the ball carrier, you know you're in trouble. So yeah, maybe it's something that comes, like we were a little bit naive. I think that when you implement new tactics as well, maybe sometimes the old things get forgotten a little bit, and it was the kind of thing that we had learned how to win again before. But like I said, we considering where we were and the massive changes we've gone through, I'm not going to complain too much. I'm surprisingly happy for someone who's just watched a Grand Slam slip away in the final seconds. I'm surprisingly happy.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think as a fan watching it, I think, look, it was obviously great drama for rugby to have a team come back in literally the last second of the game to score. It's always good there, but I think the one issue that I think they'll probably have when they look at it back is some of the players, I don't know whether it was just fatigue or if they're tired or if it was a bit more laziness, that around the rucks constantly kind of staying, not trying to get out. When the referee has seen you do it and he's spoken to you, I think that was the biggest mistake that they made. Is once France went down to 14 men, I think that's where they should have tried to click and not give away as much, because the problem is, and we see it all the time, is when one team goes down to a red card, the referee tries to even up the game. And to a certain extent that happened, but the problem is you look at it and there were probably other infringements that could have got another yellow card, and it could have gotten completely away from Wales there if they kept doing what they were doing. But look, as you said, when France are on full flow, they only need to play well for 5 minutes to score 2 tries, and that happened. You saw some of the leaders of that young French team really did step up, and you saw for probably Olivon's try, it was really, really good play from France. And even that last one where they're having to go the whole length of the field to score. Now, I thought Wales had it, but obviously the penalty again gave France that little bit of life again. And when that happens and you're down a man, it's really hard to keep a team like France out.
Yeah, so we got that big turning point as well. We could have had perhaps the penalty try with the rolling maul, and then Louis Sam, it looks like he crosses in the corner and it's touched the base of the flag. And I think it all changes from there. That that was what France needed to get their tails up again a little bit. We took the 3 points and maybe we should have gone for the 7, but it's easy to say that with hindsight. We end up losing that game by 2 points. If we'd still lost the game by 2 points, we would have gone, well, if you'd gone for the post instead of going for the corner and we didn't score a try. So it's always easy to say afterwards, to sit here and think, oh, well, I would have done things a little bit differently. We said about those leaders as well. Obviously, we lost a few. Bigger went off. Faletau got Simbin. Foxy left a few. So we did lose that experienced spine of the team. Ken Owens went off for Elliot D to come on. So those players who would be thinking, we've got Alan Wynne left and perhaps less experience than we needed of someone to just keep a cool, calm head.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, overall, when you look at it, it was a very, very even game to it when you actually look at even to the stats. So I'll go through a couple of them and you'll just see how even it was. So possession, 50-50, territory, 50-50, time in possession, France 19 minutes and 46 seconds, Wales 20 minutes, time in the opposition 22, France 6 minutes and 35 seconds, Wales 6 minutes and 56 seconds. Again, you look at, this is one that I like to look at, the points per visit, 22, 2.9 for France, 3.3 for Wales. The biggest thing that I kind of took from it was the missed tackles. So Wales 28 missed tackles to France's 8, and then the penalties conceded. So France 6 and Wales 15. And that's kind of where you saw the game kind of won and lost. And look, when you watch France play, usually the opposition does have a lot more missed tackles just because of the way they like to play. They like to play that free-flowing offload as quick as you can when you get tackled, and it's really hard to then take that second man down. But by looking at that game, what do you think that Wales need to improve on for whether, I don't know if the summer series are going to actually happen, but let's say if we have another COVID Cup or
whatever it might be.
Yeah, or if it's next year's Six Nations, what can they take from this game and learn from some of the mistakes that they did make that cost them the Grand Slam?
I think it's control more than anything. Like, we're doing really well. Some of the stats, it's unbelievable stats how close they are. That's insane. But we've been really good. You look at the points every time we visit 22. That's been great all tournament. The Scotland and Ireland games, we were 2 games in, we'd scored an all bar one visit to the 22. I think we'd scored a try, which is, you know, unheard of. That's crazy.
It's ridiculous.
We'd expect the missed tackles in an open game as well because of the style we play in defence. I say France like the offloading game, and that tackling that second man is always going to be a difficult one. It always opens up space, especially if you've got a gang tackling in, then you're causing all sorts of trouble. But because we play that blitz defence so aggressively as well, quite often we see that you miss a man and it's kind of par for the course. That's the way it is. Or you sort of hit a man in field where you half complete the tackle, but your stats are going to show that you didn't. I think the problem we had was missing tackles in close quarters. I think we got a little bit bullied again, which again we've seen in the Ireland game. Like Ireland have done it to us for years. It's not a new problem. We've had games where Ireland keep it close quarters and we can't take the ball off you. Like it's like a bully with a year 7 kid in school. Like we just, it's my ball, you're not having it, and we're not having it back. So it's been an issue that's been there for a while, where sometimes when teams with big forwards just go through the motions and we're happy to keep trucking up, we struggle to get it back off them. Obviously the discipline was a problem. I think the Liam Williams yellow is harsh for me. I've spent all day sort of digesting it, reviewing it, looking at it again. I've slowed it down, I've zoomed in, I've done just about everything, and I can't see. I don't think he did. Whether people might argue that it was a bit of a slap down on the ball, he's definitely not off his feet. Like, he does tremendously well to get back up. As you said, maybe it's having that experience to go. Well, not experience to play, but having the intelligence to go. Well, I'm not gonna compete here because it could land me in hot water. But at the same token, I'm never going to tell a player don't try and tackle Dupont. So it's that close call. I think that's where a lot of it came down to. A lot of it, as you expect in international rugby, is those fine margins, those little inches. 2 centimeters to the left, and Louis Sammet's ball is in, and it's a try, or it's the rolling ball, or one missed tackle, and suddenly you're back at your own post. It's very small margins, and it's getting those right. It's just, again, hopefully with time and with the system clicking in a little bit more and players having a little bit more time, especially the players that come off the bench. They're still very inexperienced players. So Sheedy, as good as he's looked, doesn't have much game time at international level. HallOfSportz only made his debut in the Scotland game. Jim Botham that's come off the bench. These are young lads who are coming on, and we did lose our way a little bit. You'd think within 2 years, where they've had a bit more game time and a few starts, and suddenly they become stronger members of that squad. Hopefully, that's not as noticeable when we drain our bench like that.
Yeah, absolutely. One question that I actually had, which was interesting, is that I've been kind of big into kind of club rugby, and looking at the way Rhys Sammet has come through and how he's got through kind of the Gallagher Premiership with Gloucester. How is that received over in Wales in terms of the selection for the national team of a player not playing for one of the Welsh clubs? Because I know over here in Ireland, it's a big thing. Like, you've seen how the likes of Simon Zebo has never been picked for Ireland since he moved over to France. Has that ever been a big talking point of some of the players not playing for the Welsh clubs and how that could affect the national team?
Well, as you'll know on Twitter, all Welsh regional fans are very sane, rational people, so there's no it comes up all the time. Obviously, we've got the 60 cap rule, so we're now looking at when it comes for him to extend his contract, he needs to be playing in Wales. So that's going to... Louis Rhys Sammet is a bit of a weird one because he never wanted to leave the Blues, which not something I understand. I wouldn't want to be at the Blues myself, but because he was offered a scholarship to go to Hartpury College and play, that was pretty much the choice he had to make. Like, as he said, I can either stay here and choose between an education or rugby, or I can become full-time at both. And so that's where he had to make the decision. I think we're seeing Welsh rugby cotton onto this a little bit better and treat players a little bit better. Young academy players being given those opportunities and scholarships and chances to do both. But yeah, if you listen to him, he never wanted to leave Cardiff. He was quite happy. He's Welsh. Austin Ely said about him playing for England a year back, and he just replied to him with 4 Welsh flags. So there was no doubt of where he was ever going to go. So Yeah, it's a difficult. The problem we've got is obviously when we lose, being like Falatau's playing at Bath at the moment, but we're lucky that he's got the 60 caps, so nothing needs to happen. But we have lost players that perhaps were still good enough, that would have still been eligible. We've forced a few players out as well. When you look at the likes of Cuthbert and Priestland, who got treated quite badly and so was kind of forced to go to England in the end. I think the problem we've got is we don't have a budget as big as Irish rugby. So our 4 regions are going to struggle to compete to keep all of our players in Wales. And I think that's the issue that people have, is that players could be going elsewhere and learning. And when we've had players go elsewhere, it's been a massive success in some cases. Gareth Thomas, Stephen Jones both went to France and came back better players. So it's always going to be a talking point that, well, we've got this 60 cap rule in place. Is it for the benefit of national rugby? But I think we've also got to balance up that we need to keep players at the region, and our regions need to be able to compete. And we're seeing Ospreys come up a little bit and haven't had a dire year, and even the Dragons are starting to look like they can perform, and a big win for them this weekend against Leinster. So we've got that 60 cap rule. Some people don't like it. I think on the whole at the moment it's working quite well.
Yeah, it's interesting because kind of looking even through the whole CBC deal with the Six Nations and some of the kind of RFU and the WFU, IRFU getting all this money, it'd be interesting to see where that actually goes. Does it go into kind of grassroots rugby, or will it go to try and keep some of those players, like you mentioned, that maybe they don't have the biggest budget? Maybe they'll be able to expand it a little bit to try and keep some of them. It'll be really interesting. I guess on the back of kind of talking about the French and the Welsh game, the big thing is to talk about who actually can go on and win. So again, we'll finally know who wins the Six Nations on Friday. So there's a couple of different scenarios. So really the main one for France is that they need to win by a bonus point, and they need to win by 21 points over Scotland. Or what they can do is they can win with a bonus point, win with 20 points, but they would have to score 6 tries in doing so. Again, I would assume if they score 6 tries, it's probably going to be more than 20 points.
Yeah.
Now, for Wales, as long as France don't get a bonus point win and win by 21 points, that they would win the Six Nations. So again, if France lose, they draw, or they just win normally without a bonus point. Or if a bonus point victory for France, but the winning margin is less than 20 points. And again, we were talking about this kind of off air, is there is a possibility for this to be tied, and for Wales and France to both win the Six Nations, where if France win with the bonus point, they win by 20 points, but they score 5 tries, well then Wales and France would share the title for the first time in the history of the Six Nations Championship. And that's probably something that no fan really wants. You always want a winner.
I can't work out if that's the best case scenario, because it's going to be a pub quiz question forever, or the absolute waste where we've just gone, well, we've done 2 months of this and it was pointless. We might as well just all go home.
Exactly. They've rearranged a COVID game because of all this, and at the end of the day, there's still no winner. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But look, in terms of the game on Friday, for me, I expect probably a fairly open game because France know they have to score. And that could work into the hands of Scotland. It just depends on what Scotland turns up. Does the Scotland that turns up that played against England, or is it the Scotland that played against Ireland? Because the Scotland that played against Ireland were, look, towards the end of the game, they were able to come back, but they were bullied for a large majority of that game. And we've seen just how good France can be, and they have that kind of pep in their step after coming back against Wales. So what do you expect to see on Friday night? Because it's a weird scenario where everybody else in the Six Nations is done and everyone's literally just going to be watching this game to figure out who's going to win. I don't know what's going to happen with a trophy presentation. Is it? it's going to be a strange one, especially for any Welsh fan. It reminds me of, I think it was the first year that Joe Schmidt won it for Ireland, and Ireland had played Italy in the first game of the Super Saturday. And they're waiting until the end of the game between England and France to actually lift the trophy. And I'm pretty sure there were fans that were still in the stadium from early on in the day, just in case. So it's going to be a little bit like where if Wales do end up winning, it's one of those where you lost to France, but you end up winning the Six Nations, and there'll be a bit of a party after that.
It's got to be the only tournament in the world, I think, where you can win it and still be unhappy because you've lost one game. Like, I can't think of any other league in the world where you can win and not feel like you've won. But yeah, I think it'll be a good game. You say about what Scotland turned up, but France haven't been 100% all tournament either. Like, I thought they were there for the taking against Ireland. I thought Ireland probably should have beaten them. As it happened, you were quite far enough along in your trajectory because you started slow and then built up as well. I think if it had come a week later and France had played like that, then you would. And obviously they were superb against England. They showed glimpses of being the France that they can be, but they haven't put it together for 80 minutes. I said Scotland in the England game looked absolutely fantastic and out of this world, and then at times they've looked dire. The question is as well, what Scotland team is going to go out literally? Like what actual players are going to be in shirts? Because are they sticking with Hogg at 10, who looked fairly sensible, borderline boring on Saturday? He was the most conformative 10. He sort of just looked the ship ball, and it wasn't at all what I wanted or expected. I was expecting a Finn Russell on acid kind of playing from 10 and running from whenever he wants, but. So, yeah, it's going to be big to see who Scotland have available, who's going to play there. It's going to be a massive game. It will be a strange one. And if France don't do it, it's going to be the strangest presentation since England did it in sort of a back room, whatever year that was, where they were just sort of all sat around there. Cheers, lads. So it'll be it's going to be a strange one.
Yeah, it will be, because I don't know about if it's the same thing in Wales, but if it was Ireland, that all the players would have already gone back to their clubs and there wouldn't be much of a celebration. So I can't imagine the same, because look, there's going to be games on Saturday and Sunday, and I know the Pro 14 final is on, but there'll be other games going ahead, training and stuff for a lot of the players. So it'll be interesting to see if France don't win, what sort of celebration that Wales will actually be able to do. But again, I think for any neutral fan, they hope that it's a very that a good Scotland shows up and it's an open game, to where it might again come to the last few minutes that does France need to try to win the Six Nations, or if they're winning it and Scotland come back in the last few minutes to score, that just pips France and not winning it. It's one of those, like I said, I think it's the weirdest Six Nations that we've had since the last one that got cancelled halfway through and was played 6 months later. But it is an interesting one. I guess the other game that we mentioned from the weekend is that Irish victory over England, because I think it's been 5 years since Ireland have beaten England, and it's, as an Irish fan.
How long will you wait to see that Irish victory over England then?
It feels like a long time. The last time, I believe, it was when Ireland won the Grand Slam with Joe Schmidt, when we played England on Paddy's Day, and it was that it just seems like such a long time ago, and it's one that I don't think any Irish fan actually expected to win over the weekend, because you talk to anybody before the game and everybody had the same opinion. It's going to be a tough game today. That a lot of people didn't expect it. There was a couple of interesting nuggets, obviously, before the game with CJ Stander, it was going to be his last game for Ireland. You saw the likes of Jacob Stockdale come back in. You saw Jack Conan come in for Ireland, who had a very good game against England. You saw the likes of James Lowe get dropped from the team after some of the mistakes that he made against Scotland. So I guess before the game, what did you expect from both the Irish and English performances, and did you expect Ireland to come out and be able to get the victory over England after what you've seen previously in the Six Nations this year?
Well, I was having a conversation saying England-Ireland is always going to be one of those games where it's never going to disappoint, because or very, really good. Like, you're always going to want to beat them. So regardless of your form going into it or what players you've got available, you know it's going to be a step up. There's more riding on this than just a game of rugby. And I think England's problem is they've got so many of those. The three Celtic nations and France will always want to beat England anyway. So you know it's always going to be a good game. You know you're always going to get something out of it. I was hoping on a Wales, Ireland, Scotland 1-2-3 because I thought that would have been a brilliant end to the tournament. So slightly disappointed that we're not going to get it. But yeah, it was you're always good. But Ireland, you could see them getting better as the tournament's gone on. And some players that have been super, like Ty Burns, been absolutely superb. And as a Scarlets fan, he's one of those players that we've been wanting to get a long run in the Irish team because you could see it when we done the Pro 12 and we took the title that year. He looked superb for us then. He looked incredible. And he's always looked an international quality player. For me now, the conversation isn't whether he should be in the Lions, it's just which number jersey he should be playing. Do we start him at 6 or do we put him in the second row? Because he's perhaps been the most informed player of the four nations in this tournament. Every game he turns out he looks superb. And Furlong coming back has been a massive boost to you. Like Porter's obviously a brilliant player when you Furlong coming back. So can you put him straight back in after an injury? And then you watch him last week and yeah, you can. And then he's done it again this week. He's absolutely superb. Just an all-round player because you know he's always going to be brilliant at the set piece. You know he's always going to carry well. You know he's always going to be good in the loose. And then carrying at times like an outside centre. He looks absolutely superb. So you knew that was always going to be. My worry was with you putting Murray and Sexton back in. I said it's one of those weird things because I looked at that back division for the England game and I thought that's a really old team. It's actually not. Like you take Earls and Sexton out there and it's a really normally aged team, but it just feels old. It feels like all those players have been around forever and are perhaps knocking on the door of retirement. Murray and Sexton work superbly. Keith Earls suddenly thinks he's 23 instead of 33 because that try that he scored to gas Johnny May in the way that he did was just incredible. And he's a player who's just got better with age. Like a few years ago, I was talking to Earls about how he's never quite done what he should do. What's he now, like 94, 95 now? Unbelievable on our wing. He looked up. So I always felt like there was that possibility. You always got to sum up what's head and what's heart. I think that's always the difficult thing to call a Six Nations because you don't know what's your actual brain talking and what's just because you want it to happen. So it was great to see Ireland playing out, but the way that they played was superb. It was joyous. Even I can't ever be neutral if England are playing, but as a neutral, it was brilliant.
Yeah, like the one that you mentioned there with Tadhg Furlong, he became a little bit of a cult hero against the Scotland one for sidestepping two of the Scotland backs. And then you got his reaction to when Ireland stole a scrum from England when they were down to 14 men at the time, and it was just that kind of turnover that they really needed. And I completely agree with you with kind of Tadhg Furlong that he's one of those that he's been so good and so consistent. He was really consistent for Munster for the past 12 months, but we didn't see much of that for Ireland, and we're finally seeing that for the national team, which is really, really good. And it's one of those that you've seen with this Irish team, even against England, they were missing a hell of a lot of their players as well. Like you even look at from the previous kind of Six Nations and Caelan Doris, who was out for the entire Six Nations. You saw Ryan was out of the game. There was a lot of interesting decisions that were made, but the players really came together. You saw with Jack Conan, and there's a really good video that was out on Twitter after the first try was scored, and it was an interview with Simon Easterby, and you can see the line out from behind them, and they do the exact play that they score from, where Conan knocks it down to Earls, and it's a really interesting one that obviously was worked on. But I think it's the first time in the Six Nations, look, I don't count Italy too much, but that you really saw a bit of creativity from the Irish team, which was severely lacking. And it's what I think annoyed a lot of Irish fans early on, because you look at the players that are there and you look at the quality. You see it for Leinster pretty much every single week when they're playing. And there was a lot of questions at the coaching staff as why are we not seeing more production? And they finally got to see it against England when it really, really mattered.
I think that was the issue when you look at the autumn. There was virtually no creativity at all. Like nothing was happening. You've plenty of possession and plenty of territory at times, but just doing absolutely nothing with it. And that's what's changed. And I perhaps a little bit quick to judge, but to me it looked like since Farrell had come in as head coach, like you were playing the way Farrell had played as a player. Certainly in Union, where he was solid and he was dependable and he was a great player, and you're always going to get 7 out of 10 performances out of him. But he was never going to set the world alight. Like he was never going to throw mad passes or create something, because that's not the player that he was. And that's what Ireland looked like they were falling into. And my argument's been that, like, what we saw from Super Rugby last year is always a good judge of where rugby is sort of evolving. And when those new laws came in, I think teams realised that they had to be a little bit more open. You couldn't just shut up shop and go through the phases. You had to look to create things. And France were at the front edge of that curve with the Southern Hemisphere teams, and then Wales were perhaps just behind them. I think what we saw on Saturday was that Ireland have caught on to that. And I think it's where England is struggling, because Eddie's still playing the old tactics with the old players. And it's not working out too well for them, and it certainly didn't this tournament. But it certainly looks like you've taken a massive step. That there's been something's clicked somewhere of this is how we should be playing, and this is how we can play. I think you looked a little bit more settled as well. James Lowe, not my favourite player, I'll be honest, possibly because having watched the Scarlets play Leinster and the Regents play Leinster so many times, and he's always got a good hit rate against us, and he's got that kind of look in his eye, well, looking a little bit smug sometimes, and so he's not the nicest person to love if you're this side of the water. So I won't miss him not playing. But yeah, you looked a little bit more balanced, and Stockdale, you get the feeling it's only going to be a matter of time before he finds his form again. He's a quality player. I think we can safely say you can cancel the experiment of playing him at 15 and just keep him on the wing and leave him do what he does, because when he does it well.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest problems that a lot of Irish fans had last year, and I think a lot of people are very appreciative that Hugo Keenan has come in, because they really needed that 15 after Rob Kearney left. And it's a tough one, because you looked at the game and you're starting to see some of the players for Ireland come through, and you look at kind of Leinster, and there's still a lot of those younger players that haven't been capped yet that probably deserve to be kind of coming up. You've seen it with Ryan Baird, who got to play in the game towards the end, and he seems like he's in the same mold as James Ryan. When you look at them back to back, they have a similar game type, and it's an interesting one. I think the biggest problem Ireland had early on in the tournament and in the Autumn Nations is that they just went from side to side a lot. There wasn't a lot of penetration when they were attacking. We're starting to see that now, which was a surprise when you had players like Robbie Henshaw playing as well as he did, because like you said with Tyke Byrne, where the only question really is for the Lions tour is, does he play 5 or does he play 6? For me, I've always said it, for Robbie Henshaw, the question really is he 12 or is he 13? He's been that good. And the fact that I thought Tyke Byrne was excellent against England, so was Furlong, but yet I think Henshaw was just on that different level. And a lot of people here said he was the one that really brought everybody together, and his intensity it gets soaked up by the rest of the players, and that really got them up for the game. And it was one of those that was, I think, Ireland needed to have that prove-it performance to show that things were working, because a lot of the players were saying a lot of the right things after some of the games earlier on, but a lot of people didn't believe it. You saw Sexton come out quite often saying that we've had really good training sessions, we've been practicing this, that a really good performance is coming. And there's a lot of people say, yeah, okay. But we didn't really see it. Now, I guess the last thing to kind of mention on this, it was one of the talking points anyway, was the Bundyaki red card, that we've seen quite a couple of these over the last couple of weeks. it's an unfortunate one because you see Vunipola kind of lowering himself down a little bit, and he's still too high. But what do we need to kind of get players to understand to try and outlaw these tackles from the game? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh,
there you
go. It's exactly what we saw on Saturday. It's just by punishing them. You know, if it is a high tackle, it's got to be a red card. And it's what we saw it with the tip tackle. Like, as a Welsh fan, we're still very upset about Sam Warburton getting sent off in the World Cup against France. What we see now is if there's a tip tackle and a player doesn't get carded, people are questioning why. Whereas, sort of, if there was a card when we first started bringing that rule in, everyone was up in arms saying it's ridiculous. What that shouldn't be. There's a good dump tackle and he's gone a little bit too far, but it's fine. Whereas now we've accepted that it's not fine at all. And I think that's what will slowly creep in. And perhaps when you're used to a tackle technique or you're used to a style, it takes a little bit of time to sink in where it becomes your second nature and it becomes like muscle memory. But I think as players start to get carded and it costs people games, what we'll see is they'll go, actually, yeah, we need to address this. We need to look at this. And I think it's working. Hopefully we'll, after seeing a spate of reds for high tackles and incorrect clear outs and edge shots, eventually people will catch on. We saw it in rugby league, so the late 90s, where they brought in the change of rule with headshots and swinging arms. And we had mad games where teams were playing with 11 aside and 10 in some cases, and scores were like 54-49. And eventually people thought, well, we can't carry on like this because it's costing us games and it's going to cost us a title. So it's the only way that people will learn is by losing games because of it. It is harsh because there's clearly no intent, but yeah, you could see the remorse in it straight away as soon as he did it, that there was no intent to go out and injure or hurt anyone. But it's looking at that tackle technique and say, Vunipola, I think that the unfortunate thing is if Vunipola, he was knocked out, like he was out before he hit the ground, it was quite clear. And I was really glad to see them take him off and no messing around, because the number of times we've seen teams trying to put a player back on, it was good to get that sorted straight away. But yeah, I think that's the only way players are going to learn is by when it starts costing them games.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate one. It's an unfortunate one because we look at it now and you see a lot of those tackles get red cards. Like, we've seen the most amount of red cards in the Six Nations, and I don't know how long. But I guess then you see in the same game, and this is, I couldn't believe when I heard the news today with the Ellis Genge kind of like elbows to Johnny Sexton's head at least 3 or 4 times in the one play, and the referee doesn't even look at it, and then he doesn't get cited. So you think of, well, a player is gone a bit high on someone where he's made contact with their head when there's no like intent for that to happen. But then you have another player who's intending on kind of trying to injure a player and nothing happens. So I think that's where players probably get a little bit annoyed, where you do see that in one case that there's a player that's intentionally trying to injure another player and nothing happens. And then another one, it's like a very kind of quick tackle that happens that because he gets his arms in the wrong place. Like, I would completely understand it if it's kind of the shoulder to the head where there's no attempt to wrap up. But you see with Aki that he has tried to do it. He's made contact with the head, which nowadays is going to be a red card. But I think the problem for a lot of players is going to be that consistency in refereeing, because you could see that Sexton was annoyed because there's plenty of times that he was trying to talk to the referee, and normally I would say you shouldn't be talking to him, but when you're the captain of the team, you should be able to have that conversation with the referee, especially when the clock was already stopped because there was an injury that was being taken care of at the time. I thought it was really bad on the officiating there that it wasn't even looked at.
It's horrific when you watch the video as well. And especially there's the video where Sexton's trying to talk to the ref and he says he's elbowed me in the head. And Genge say, I did. Like, if you say it, like, plus we go, can we just have a check of that? Can we see if anything's up? Because it's so blatant. It's really, and then I think Matawira has come out today and said that, like, will rugby need to step in because this needs to be a ban. And if there's a guy who knows rugby and those close quarter stuff and the dark arts is a prop who's going to work up like Maduira. So I honestly, watching the video, it's unbelievable to see it. It's like something from the 70s that it would have barely been acceptable then. It's like a 99 call kind of punch-up. I can't understand how nothing's going to come of it. It needs to be a ban. And there was an incident with Genge at the end of the Wales game where he seemed to push Elliot D's head into the two, and it was one of those ones where you go through, and I sort of say, it's one of those incidents that happen, benefit of the doubt. I don't think you can give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. It's horrific. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, it baffles me that the Six Nations haven't cited him on it, because it just is one of those that is so very clear for anybody to see. And it's the reason you've seen so much outrage today on all social media platforms, that it's more of people don't understand how it's not a ban. When you see there's many red cards during the tournament for things that weren't malicious and weren't intentional and were mistakes, and players have accepted their bans. But something like this, where, like you said, it's not the first time that something like this has happened for the player, and at some point in time they're going to have to deal with it, because the problem is, if you don't, then it's just going to keep on happening, and
it sets a precedent.
Yeah, and that's the problem. If you're gonna ban players and you're gonna send players off for being too high and it's dangerous play, that's fine. I think a lot of fans can get behind that. They're trying to make the game safer, but then you do have to punish these type of ones a lot more. Like, I had Rachel Burford on, who was talking to me about some of her teammates that have been sent off, and there was ones that literally is like a second too late and there's a sending off, but yet then there's a really, really bad tackle where you can tell there's malicious intent there, and the ban's the exact same. There needs to be a bit more common sense, I think, when that isn't really done with rugby at the moment, where it seems like it's the same ban, whether it's like, for example, you look at I think it was the Scotland and Wales game where there was a slip that kind of led to a red card happening. That one you can tell is a mistake. It's high, but it's still a red card. But then when you see something like that and you don't see the suspension, it is strange. I do hope World Rugby do kind of come in. Like, it's not going to make much difference internationally, but at least for club rugby, a player that's doing that should get suspended, because it's something we're trying to get rid of the game.
There needs to be something. It's thing, because the video went up today and somebody replied, "That's why I don't need my kids to play rugby." And you go, well, that's exactly the issue. Like, we can pretend this all rugby values, and every week it seems to be more and more eroded. Like, it's a nonsense idea with this rugby values, because you say yes sir to a ref and shake hands and have a beer after that, everything else is fair. Like, that's absolutely not the case. And rugby's got deeper issues at the minute as well. But the old disciplinary system seems shot at the moment. And I don't want to throw an Irish player bus, but the Xander Ferguson records, you say he had a week more than Peter O'Mahony had the week before.
Yeah.
Because he said that, he disputed it and said, well, I don't think it's a red, it's a yellow. The really bad thing about that was the TMO kind of suggested the same thing in the Wales-Scotland game, where he said, is it a red? Maybe it's just yellow. We'll look at it. They watched it numerous times. So they were conflicted as well. But then O'Mahony went in and said, yeah, okay, I accept that that's a red, because it's a nailed-on red.
Yeah.
And he gets a week less for it being a worse incident. So
yeah,
the whole system seems a bit screwed at the moment. I can't quite get my head, but for something as massive as this one to completely slip through the net and not be picked up by a ref, by a TMO, and then if it's going to be by a sighting officer as well, it's shocking. I just can't get my head around it.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's for me, it's that someone is really just sticking their head in the sand. You have to look at the outrage of when it happened amongst not just Irish fans. You look at even neutral fans online, and like, I would even talk to some of my friends that are from England, and all of them said that should have been a sending off. When you have everybody agreeing that it should have been a sending off, and he hasn't been cited for a dangerous play like that, it sets like you said, it sets a very worrying precedent for this type of action to take place again, because if he doesn't get cited and then somebody else does it and gets a red card, they have the option then to kind of dispute that, because they'll say, well, there wasn't a suspension on this one here and it's the exact same thing. And that's the problem that rugby are going to have. I guess a good way to kind of end it is the win for Ireland also was a special moment, you could tell, for CJ Stander as well, because his last game, I know his family, especially with COVID, has been over in South Africa because, again, they wanted to be closer with the rest of the family. And probably this is probably one of the main reasons as well, that the change in him continuing on for another season versus retiring. But just as kind of a player for Munster and for Ireland, a lot of people at the start used to complain the fact that he was from South Africa and then he came over and played. But he's represented Ireland in such a good way, and especially with Munster, that he's been kind of that person that you would want to represent your country when coming out. And he's put a lot to the sport, and you could see just how much it meant to him after the game.
Yeah, that's people have this idea of the old mercenary idea that players are just coming over here for the money and for the caps. And I said you can see how much it meant to him. It, literally in tears on the side. There was so many emotions, and I mean it's come as a massive shock as well. Let's be honest. Like, it came seemingly from nowhere. He seemed to be finding his form again. He was looking close. I mean, again, being a Welsh fan, I'd always go for Falter, but talking Lions, I think he was pushing pretty close for that starting 8 jersey. Whether he'll still get that, and it'll be a great way to sign off. I mean, should this Rainbow Cup ever happen, I wonder whether we will see him pop back up 6 to 9 months down the line playing for one of the South African teams over here. And I don't think anybody would sort of begrudge him that. I was a little bit disappointed. I won't go as far as surprised when he announced his retirement, that Dan Leo kind of jumped on that and used it for his argument about the Pacific players and this playing for a second nation thing, and now that's not allowed, which, like, I fully backed Dan Leo on the way the Pacific Island nations are being treated at the moment. But I thought it wasn't great to not let Stander have his time, especially knowing full well the sentiments towards him when he first came over and he first put on that shirt, and the way that he was treated. He needed to have his moment. He certainly had it on Saturday. Like, he a brilliant player, but the outpouring of emotion was even bigger than I expected. I think to end that way. I think it's the most emotional retirement since Shane Williams retired for us. So it was great to see. He'll be missed. I think the good thing with Ireland, Conan coming back in, he looks every bit an international 8 and one who's going to become quality for years to come. I do think you're building that depth now. The players are coming back again. I think you sort of, the worry for me, if I'd been Irish, was the starting 10, because I think a lot's older on Sexton. But obviously, now that Carberry's back playing again for Munster, I think you've got the natural successor, as long as he comes through okay and starts playing to the level he was at before he got injured. But yeah, a big loss, but I think you'll absorb it quite well, to be honest.
Yeah, it's actually the one position. I was talking to some of my friends the last couple of days, that I think Ireland do have quite a number of players that are coming through there. You mentioned Conan, you obviously kind of the 2 flanker positions. You do have Van der Fleer, there's still Dan Levy to come back, you have Max Deegan, who's been injured, you have, even I look at Leinster, and one of the better players this season has been Scott Penny. I think it's only a matter of time before he gets his opportunity at the international level. And yeah, I think the biggest issue that Ireland are going to have is what you mentioned there, is who is that next successor to Johnny Sexton. You have the debate, is it Joey Carberry, is it Harry Byrne? Again, it's one of those, because you look at the players that have been there, you look at kind of Jack Carty, who hasn't really done much. You haven't seen much from Ross Byrne in terms of international level, in terms of being that person to take over. And I don't think there's a lot of people that have a whole lot of faith in Billy Burns to take kind of that jersey over once Sexton does leave. But I think this is probably the perfect time for Ireland to kind of find that next step, whether it's if if there are summer series. I know it hasn't been announced yet, or even in the autumn internationals. There's really no point in playing some of your top level guys. You're better off kind of introducing some of the new caps in and seeing how they get on at an international level, because like we said plenty of times, it's a completely different level. I do hope we get to see the Rainbow Cup and see some of those South African teams come over, because again, it's one of those that you really would love to see. I've always been an advocate that I'd love to see some of those kind of New Zealand and Australian teams come over and see how some of the top teams in Europe deal with it, because you look at Super Rugby over the last few weeks and some of the games there are so high paced and really physical and athletic players, and it's always good to be able to see how the likes of Leinster do kind of come up against some of those really, really good New Zealand teams, because eventually if some of these European teams really want to go off and really do well in World Cups, you're going to have to start playing against some of these kind of big sides, because as a Leinster fan, they don't get that many hard games on a yearly basis, and that's the reason why they went almost a year without losing a game, but yet didn't win a European Cup. So it's a big, I think it's a problem, but it's a good solution for something like the Rainbow Cup to happen. So I guess the last thing that I'll ask you is, and it's a very simple question, who do you think wins the Six Nations Championship?
I think by a default, I think Wales are going to take it. It's one of those where I say it's not often you win a championship and still slightly disappointed because the Grand Slam's gone. But I think Scotland are too good to write off. Maybe if we were going into this a few years ago and you said France needed 20 points against Scotland, you would have gone, now we're doomed. But I think Scotland are good enough. They'll give France a good game. Whether they'll beat France, I don't know. But I can't see them capitulating to the point that France are going to run in 4 bonus points and beat them by more than 21. Now that they've said that, I've probably put the markers on and it's all done. But I will say if France do win it, I put a bet on France finishing first and Wales finishing second before this tournament started. So either way, I'm happy. I'm quid in. So
yeah, that's always good. Like it's an interesting. It would be so typical for the year that's in it that France end up not winning and nobody really gets to lift the trophy, and it's just handed to Wales, and there's no celebration behind it. But
reading Pivac picking it up in his front room.
Yeah, pretty much. And there'll be a little stream on Instagram or something telling them that they won the Six Nations Championship. And it'd be so
exactly right. Yeah, it's going to be like Facebook Live, and then that's it. That's the end.
Yeah, exactly. But look, it's been great talking to you today. I guess, where can people find some of your work?
So yeah, I'm on Twitter as what is my Twitter? At RucknRoll Rugby, and then we've got the RucknRoll Podcast, and I think we need to go live streaming because I love the setup. It's absolutely great. So. I think that'll be next. Ryan, who does a podcast, will be delighted. He's been trying to get me to do videos for long enough, but I think I need a haircut and a beard trim first before that happens.
I don't know what it is over there for you guys, but our barbers haven't been open in months now, so a chance in us getting.
What's going on? I'm trying to tuck it under my headset to try and hide away how bad it is.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable talking to you today, and sure we'll have you on again to talk more.
No, it's been great being on it. Thanks for having me. I'd gladly come back.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thank you, man.